How's it going, everybody? And welcome back to another episode of the Armed Scholar podcast. So, thank you guys so much, everybody who's been listening to the podcast. This is probably going to be the first video one that you guys are seeing. It's going to be a little bit of an experiment. So, bear with us as we kind of do this and work through some of the kinks. But this is going to be podcast number 10. With the relaunch, we finally actually hit 10 podcasts, and that's kind of the golden number as far as podcast. They say, like, if you can survive through 10 podcasts, maybe you actually have something. So I thought no one better to have for the 10th podcast and kind of the first video one than my good friend Jared from Guns and Gadgets. So, I know a lot of you probably know Jared, but thought it'd be really cool to have him on here and just have a conversation with him. So thanks, Jared.
Thanks, bud. I appreciate it. I'm honored, and keep killing it, man. You're doing big things, and I'm glad to see you kick booty in our industry. Keep going.
Yeah, the kick booty, so we don't hit that that automatic YouTube censorship. No, I mean it's funny. I know a lot of people. I'm sure you see it a lot on your channel. Also, people are always commenting like, "Hey, you should really check out this other guy. He does similar stuff to you. He talks a lot about statutes and laws and stuff. You should really get together with him." I don't know if you've heard of him. His name's Jared from Guns and Gadgets. Little do they know, like, we've known each other for quite a while now, like many years now, which has been awesome. Been a huge blessing to me. So
yeah, man, same here. I constantly still get those comments all the time, which is cool because as a fellow content creator, I'm sure you wish every one of our subscribers watched every one of our videos, and human nature, it's not possible. Yeah. But I like to see those ones like, hey man, have you ever heard of Anthony, the Armed Scholar? And I say, yeah, actually we're really pretty good friends, and we're together most of the time at most industry events. So it's pretty cool to see, or maybe even new viewers coming over to like cross-pollination on our channels. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. And that's kind of the goal also with the podcast, is to have longer form discussions, bring on people that, who are friends, and just have these really cool conversations that sometimes we don't really get to have because we're trying to get stuff in 8-10 minute segments. Sometimes we do longer form stuff here and there, but it's a little bit more targeted. So, I really don't have a goal with this specific podcast. I thought it'd be cool just to have a conversation with you and bring the audience, maybe people who aren't aware of you, bring them to you as well. So I guess the first question for those who aren't aware, like, who are you? What do you do? Maybe what's your background? And then we can maybe get a little bit into like how you started this whole craziness that is YouTube.
Sure, man. Well, my name is Jared. I currently live in Massachusetts, although I bought a home in Tennessee, and in the process of moving. What do? I do Guns and Gadgets. It's the Second Amendment news channel on YouTube. It's been 2014 is when I started it, so it's early 2014. So I'm coming up on 10 years of YouTube. Never thought I'd ever hear that. And like yourself, man, I try to stay at the forefront of what's going on so we can keep our audiences informed.
Yeah. It's crazy to think you've been doing it for 10 years. So, and that was one of the interesting things. Like, I know we talk about this a lot, like together when we first started, or at least when I started, there was really not a whole lot of other two-way news people. Really, like the people I watched were Will from Copper Jacket TV, Colion Noir, and that was really it. There wasn't a whole lot of two-way news, legal stuff on YouTube, firearms specific. There was a lot of gear review stuff, but definitely, like, you were a huge inspiration to me for wanting to start. And I guess I think I've said this before on a podcast, but you were one of the first people in the industry I ever met. I actually have a question for you. When was the first time you became aware of me and my channel?
Well, we first met at the Gundies a couple of years ago, and I knew who you were. I was watching your channel and I subscribed by then. So I would say it's got to be close to 3 years ago now that I started watching you. Like you said, there weren't a lot of us doing it. When I started my channel, I was the first one to only do 2A news. I didn't do any major shooting stuff or review stuff. And then when you came along, because if you remember back then, I was trying to cover California as well as the rest of the country. And then you hopped on and you were California centric in the beginning. Most of your stuff was California. And that was awesome because I was trying to do 50 different things at once. And you breaking stuff down allowed me to see what was going on. And then I could focus my efforts on certain things in California instead of trying to follow every bill they drop. So that's how I first found your channel. and you were a great resource.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy to go back and think because I started my channel in 2019, and I obviously knew who you were. I feel like the first interaction I ever had with you was I think you commented on one video. I don't even know what it was. I'm sure it's out there. Like I think I screen grabbed like your comment and like fangirled like on my Instagram or something. I think that was the first interaction I ever had with you because I was like, oh, I've made it. Jared's commented on my video. And because I knew who you were before we went to the Gundies. And I remember, so kind of inside baseball stuff. When the first time I went to Gundies, I was like top 4 for most influential male or something like that. Should not have been there at all. But I remember pulling up with my wife in our rental car in that really horrible hotel, the Days Inn in Uvalde rundown. And then in the parking lot, I remember seeing you and Chris from Honest Outlaw. And I like sat in my car and I was like, babe, do you know who that is? She's like, no. She doesn't really watch anybody. And I was like, that's Jared. That's Jared from Guns and Gadgets. And she's like, oh, okay. You can get out of the car. I'm like, no, give me a second. Give me a second. Because I think we had already had a little bit of interaction before that, but it was like the first time meeting you. And I totally like had that fangirl butterfly weird moment. But yeah.
Well, thanks, dude. It's humbling. It's an honor, but
and
I'm
then,
just a regular dude, man.
yeah, I know. And that's like you get to know everybody and almost every gun YouTuber, every person you really meet. Most of the time they're awesome people. We're just people trying to do the best we can on YouTube. And a lot of us just kind of fell into doing this. There's not a whole lot of rhyme or reason. But yeah, and since then, I think we've known each other since then. We talk pretty much every day now, right?
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, and
although you're on that West Coast time at 4.
Yeah. I'm on that real coast time, the real hour time. Yeah.
You texted me like 2:30 last night, you clown.
What?
You texted me like 2:30 a.m. this time.
I know, I do that all the time and I forget that like, oh, it's 11 o'clock here, but it's super late there. I do that every time. No, but I guess I'm curious. I don't know if I've actually asked you this. Like, how did you start your channel? Like, what was the reason? What was like the thought process? Like you said, you were kind of the first one to do the 2A news stuff, and you've been doing YouTube for 10 years. So, kind of what prompted you to want to do it?
It's kind of odd. Like you said, I stumbled into it. So I actually started the channel itself over 10 years ago, and the 2A stuff has been about 10 years now. When I started Guns and Gadgets at the time, everything on YouTube was like either a cat video or a holster review. And I was a firearms instructor, still in law enforcement, and I was out of work with a blown shoulder. I had just had surgery on my shoulder. So I was watching a couple videos, and my oldest son, who's now almost 23 at the time, he's like, you can do that. Why don't you do that? And I said, yeah, I can if this guy can do a holster review, I can too. I mean, it's my life. So he called me out, and we're in the basement of my house. The video's still up. It's I think it's an alien gear review. We were in the basement. I had no concept of background or lighting. We were in a basement, dark and dank, and cobwebs in the background. And he held up an iPhone, and that was it. So that was with the original start of the channel. I wanted to do gun reviews and gear and gadget reviews, but then I've had a family. I wasn't making a lot of money, and it's very expensive to just procure guns and do reviews on them. So every now and then, it was right around, when did I make the big switch? I forgot what the big legal thing that happened in the country, but I started to cover a couple lawsuits in and around Massachusetts every now and then. And then I covered like the laws behind getting a license to carry in Massachusetts. And I noticed very early on, before YouTube was big on analytics, that those types of videos always pop. They always did better than if I'm doing a review on a holster, or, back then you could show people how to install a Laser Max guide rod.
Yeah.
So I started to do more and to do more. And it just kind of formed what it is now. I've been through 3 different police academies in 3 different states. And like Old English is like a second language for me. So I like to read Old English, and like yourself, if you can read it, you can translate it into common layman terms for people who get lost in that type of stuff. You can get a lot of information across to people that they might not have been able to get on their own. So that's where it started. And now it's just nonstop, man.
Yeah. So now you pretty much do this. You're retired now, correct?
Yeah, I was just destroyed my back on the job, so they medically retired me after a surgery and multiple attempts at rehab. So now I am a full-time YouTuber.
Yeah.
That's kind of
How's
weird.
that make you feel? Do you ever think that?
No, man, it's we. If you told me 20 years ago, 25 years ago, that while I was working midnights, and that I could be sitting in a spare room in my house talking to a camera, and doing research and bills and lawsuits and talking to attorneys and stuff, I would have called you crazy.
Yeah, it's definitely a weird world. Like, and I mean, it's funny. I feel like everybody I've talked to, we all have a similar story. Like mine was the same thing. Like, there were people like you who had paved the way like on YouTube. So it was in my, at least I had a little bit of leg up because of people like you, like Colion, and everybody I've got to meet now. But similar situation, had always thought about like, hey, I think I can do this too. And mine was just during that time period when I think the ammunition restriction in California had just hit, and we had just come off of like the Duncan Freedom Week,
Right.
and there was just like so many questions going around, just even in my personal life. Like, and as I was practicing, like people would ask me because they knew I was kind of like a gun guy. I was like, oh, I think I could maybe do this. And my wife was gone like 2 or 3 weeks at a time because she was traveling with this dental company at the time. So I was like, and I watched Jonathan from Tactical Toolbox. He did a video series of like how to be a gun YouTuber.
Yeah, I remember that.
Walked, yeah, and he walked through it like really well. Like, Jonathan's awesome.
Yeah.
And his stuff is always super high quality, but he like walked through like the back end stuff, the analytics side, all the really nerdy stuff that like I wanted to know because I'm a nerd. I want to know all like the nitty gritty, the analytics side stuff. And once he did put that, I was like, okay, I can do it. And then my wife is in Idaho. I remember texting her being like, hey, where's that camera that we have? And she's like, I don't know. It's somewhere. Why do you want the camera? I was like, oh, no reason. It just, didn't tell her for a long time.
Just going to be famous. That's all.
Yeah. Actually, in my mind, I was like, I would be happy if like two people watch this. Like if I could help two people kind of navigate the craziness that's going on. And just, it's crazy how it becomes, but yeah, same video style. Like I was in my kitchen. It's horrible, like in my kitchen, internal audio from the camera,
Yeah.
the reverb, you can hear the fridge running. Yeah, it's crazy.
We've come a long way, man.
Yeah, it's been a road for sure. And like similar to you, like never would have thought it would happen like this. It's awesome to get to make friends like you and a lot of other people, like-minded people, especially like me being in California. Like,
Yeah, you're one of those guys.
yeah, it's a lot of like, even you go to certain gun stores and there's still like a weird makeup of people that even work at gun stores. Like not everybody's the same two-way. Like if you go to other places like Johnson City, like with Johnny and all those people, like it's a different breed of two-way.
Oh yeah,
definitely more like absolutist for sure. So yeah, it's been a huge blessing getting to meet people like you and other people. So yeah, I don't, as far as like other questions, I mean, I know you had a background of being a police officer, and I've heard you tell this story a few times of like how you got into becoming a police officer. Do you mind sharing that? Because I always think every time I hear that story, I always think it's pretty interesting, like how you ended up getting into like the police academy and all that.
Yeah, all right. So we're going back. I'm 47 now. We're going back a long time, man. I grew up really, really, really rough. My dad was in federal prison. My mom was a single mom trying to raise two kids, worked, nighttime job where I was forced to be my younger brother's dad, brother, and caretaker. Grew up in a housing project in and around it, and got to see some things that people should never see at ages that we saw them things in. And I realized that these people who were falling victim to predators in the project, were, if they were able to defend themselves, things would be different. And my family, my mother and her, my aunts and uncle, they kind of were, well, not kind of, they were an anti-gun family. My grandfather and my uncle, they were pro-gun. They used to go hunting all the time, and my uncle taught me how to shoot at a young age with a BB gun. But my mother was adamant, no guns, and I live in Massachusetts, so that tells you everything you need to know.
Mm-hmm.
But then because of what I experienced, I kind of wanted to be that person who could help a kid never have to experience things that I did, to try to be somebody to maybe change that lineage of people like me. Right. So I wanted to be a cop. I knew at like age 10, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to help people out, and I wanted to protect people who couldn't protect themselves or who state told them they couldn't protect themselves. And I got in the police academy, like literally as soon as I was eligible legally to do it by age. I got hired and started to see things in a different light. So we grew up Democrat, Massachusetts. My family, my mom, very liberal compared to me, and I got to see a different side of life. I get to see, how things really are and how crime affects people and how decisions made by politicians affect the way laws are enforced or the way people are either held accountable or not held accountable, or if criminals go out and reoffend constantly and never held accountable. And it really forged my view on people's individual rights, specifically to keep and bear arms, to protect themselves. And I tried to be a very early advocate for people to get a gun and protect themselves. If I was on domestic scenes or scenes where people were brutalized and victimized, I always asked, like, what are you doing to help protect yourself? Can I help you? Can I teach you stuff at the range and stuff like that? And it just kind of flourished from there. And then, years and years go by, and I became a sergeant. And part of my onboarding process, I took over the training. Part of my onboarding process for all new officers was literally what you see behind me in every video. I have the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. These are the ones that were in my office. And I would take every new person we hired into my office, and I'd point out a different paragraph or section or article and say, read that and tell me what it says in your own words and tell me why you're here. And most people who get on law enforcement, they go back to, I want to help people. And I would say, BS, tell me why you're here, because it's different for every person. And that's kind of what I wanted to instill in the next generation, is like, this is what it's all about. And we're here to protect that and to enforce that, not to stomp on that. And, there's not a lot of people out there on the job that aren't like that, but one is too many. And I wanted to try to change that as well. So, I never served a red flag law. In fact, I told my chief I would never do it, which was an interesting conversation, but I never did anything.
I'm sure also in Massachusetts, it's an interesting conversation to be like, yeah, I'm never going to do that.
Yeah, it's, but to me, it's a job. It was always a job. It was never my life. Like, cause there are more important things than, working a shift. For me, it was my rights and doing what I'm doing now is what I've always done. I just do it on YouTube. I want people to understand our rights are our rights, and I don't care what people's feelings are. We all have rights. And that was something I tried to always do. And, I started in 1997 and I retired last spring. So quite a long period of time.
Journey. Yeah. Cause even when I met you, you were still technically working law enforcement. I mean, I've known you, 3 years now? Three,
yeah, little
something like that.
I don't, dude. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, 3 years. It doesn't even seem like that at all. But I think you were still working. I think you had just gotten hurt with your back.
Yeah.
You had just kind of got put on medical, and you were dealing with all that. And that was, I think the whole time I've known you, you were dealing with it until this year.
Yeah, it was tough. I think when I finally got cleared, because I had to get cleared by a doctor to go to Texas, because that's a long ride for somebody with a jacked up back. And I think that was the first thing I did after the injury was being able to go to the Gundies.
Oh yeah, that's right. Because I remember you were really, when we got in the tank, you were really hesitant, because that even jacked me up. Like my back's not perfect, but it's definitely not like yours, like fused and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I was bedridden for a couple of days when we got back home.
Yeah, that was an interesting. Yeah, I only did that first year. I only rode the tank that first year. I didn't do it this last one. I probably won't do it again this year. So yeah. So actually, quick caveat. So you're up again for top 4, correct?
With you. Yeah.
Are you in 2 categories or 1?
I think I don't know. They haven't released them all. I'm in 2 categories. I know I'm a final four person in the top 2A voices with yourself.
Hold on.
I don't think
hold on. We got to hit them with it.
Yeah, there you go. Look at that.
So I won last year top 2A voices, and then you won. What did you won breakout, right? Because they didn't have a top 2A voices, because at the time it was like me and then you. So they didn't have 4. there were 2 people. We were just alternated.
So my category was top. I'm looking at it. Breakout creator of the year.
Yeah,
and
you
then
beat
last
Autumn.
year
You beat Autumn.
Yeah, people were so mad at me.
Yeah. You beat out that poor little girl in the cowboy hat.
Love you, Autumn, if you're watching.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. It's also weird to like be nominated for awards and stuff like that. Like I'm sure when you started and when I started to, never would have thought like any of the stuff. So
No, and the cool part about it is like I'm not in it for the awards. Really, I'm
no.
not. It's humbling. It's an honor because we're voted on by people who watch us, and if they like what we do and support what we do that much that they're willing to go back and vote for
Yeah.
us multiple times, I mean that says a lot, and it's very humbling.
Yeah, to be willing, and it's also like I don't know. We've talked about this, but I guess for the audience, I think it'll be interesting. Like, and it resonated with me when you were talking about like when I first started, I was so California centric, and that was the community I wanted to serve. And what's happened over time with the channel is like I've expanded out to national stuff, national legislation, national lawsuits in Oregon, Washington, New York, New Jersey, Rhode Island, Illinois. And it really is like this really humbling yet intense responsibility because I'm sure you get this all the time. Like every single day when I pull up my email, there are viewers who are emailing me like, hey, we really need you to talk about XYZ piece of legislation here. We need you to talk about this lawsuit. We need, and I guess maybe you can speak on that a little bit. Like, what are your feelings? Because I know for me, it's very humbling, but it's also a very daunting task to be like to have
Yeah.
to be that voice that people rely on. Because again, I feel like I'm just a guy talking in a camera in my spare bedroom. Like,
Yeah, I mean, it's an honor that people trust us enough to say, "Hey, Anthony, this is what's going on in our state. Please help us." It's honoring. It's humbling, but it's also disappointing for me because I can't get to all of it. I
yeah,
really can't. That's why I love that there's more channels like
yeah,
yourself that have come along because it's impossible for one or two people to do because there's so many things that these politicians at multiple levels want to do to restrict our right to keep and bear arms. So, and it's tough sometimes where I got to make that decision. Like I want to help, whatever,
yeah. I want
this
to
little
talk
tiny
about this thing
town.
happening, yeah, in Rhode
Yeah,
Island, but
but
this
at the same,
national thing hit that more people are asking about. So I got to cover this national thing versus
yeah,
Rhode Island.
it's
Not to like step on Rhode Island or anything like say anything about Rhode Island, but sometimes you have to make that evaluation of what are the people most interested in or asking me the most about.
right. And so what I try to do now, as the channel continues to grow, is if it's something that I know I can't get to, I will try to at least put it on my social media. Like I'll
Yeah.
put it out on my Twitter or my Facebook because that's still several 100,000 people who get to see that, and then ask them to resubmit it, retweet it, forward and stuff like that, so we can still get it out. But yeah, it's extremely humbling. I do that. If you, like I said, if you told me that people would be emailing me all across the country with information, again, I would have said you were nuts. But it's here we are, and I wouldn't trade this for anything else.
Yeah, it's very humbling. I can speak for both of us. I know it's very humbling. It's a huge responsibility. We don't take it lightly at all. We try our best. Like you put out sometimes 3, 4, like especially when stuff is moving, you're putting out like 3 or 4 videos a day. I don't do that. I'm like 1 video a day type of person. Um, but even for you, like sometimes when you're putting out 3 or 4 videos, you can't catch it all. And
No,
sometimes like I rely on like, hey, I'm going to cover this, and I know Jared and Braden and you know Will and Mike from Guns and Gear, like everybody's covering this thing over here. So I'm going to leave that to them. I'm going to cover this. I'll take this one, and refer people over to these other videos, which I try to do the best I can. But yeah, it's daunting sometimes for sure.
yeah. Maybe we should team up more and figure out who's covering what.
Yeah, a better way. Yeah, group. Yeah, we need a more comprehensive group chat. Okay, who's covering this? Like,
Yeah,
who wants to take this? You get the northeast. Like, I'll take the northwest. Yeah, it's
we'll have our own
But I
circuit.
think that's also the cool thing is like the community, like meeting a lot of these guys, and very rarely have I ran into someone who doesn't have the same mindset that we do and doesn't have the same passion that we do. Everybody does it different. Like, Brandon Herrera does supports the 2A and pushes the 2A in a different way than we do. Like, his value is bringing in newer, younger people, getting them interested in firearms. And then as they not necessarily mature, but as they get more interested in the topic, then they start moving towards 2A based stuff like us, like legislation, cases, whatever, but you still first have to get them in the door, get
Right.
them interested in firearms, especially if they don't have someone in their household who's doing that. You know, YouTube is an amazing mechanism to get people interested in firearms that we just recently have kind of sprung up. Like, yeah, you've been doing it for 10 years, but it's still technically in its infancy.
Oh yeah, yeah. And the cool part is like when like Brandon or Grand Thumb, they get those newer viewers in, realizing, hey, I actually might like shooting and stuff like that, and then they don't come to our side of the coin until they say, "What do you mean I can't buy that in my state?"
Yeah.
And that's when
Yeah.
they figure out who we are.
Yeah. What do you mean they want to ban this new thing that I watched Grantham do a review of and I bought, and now all of a sudden they're going to try to take it away from me and not compensate me for it?
Right.
Like,
What do you
maybe,
mean I can't shoot 11 rounds? Why not?
yeah. Or even worse, like right now, like, what do you mean Grantham can't shoot 30 rounds on his channel anymore? Like, what's going on with that?
Yeah,
Which is a whole debacle within itself. We don't have to get into that in here, but yeah, I guess maybe just to close this out, maybe we'll give them a little bit more something substantial to chew on. So let's talk a little bit about the ATF stuff, the pistol
sure.
brace rule, because that's the hot topic right now. I know you've covered extensively. I've covered extensively. Pretty much every channel, every gear review channel, almost everybody's covering it. Maybe do you want to do this? You can do the synopsis because you're my guest. I'll make you do the synopsis.
Well, I
Do you
think
want to
we'll
just
work
do a
together
quick?
on this because it's there's so many
Oh yeah.
working gears to this that for me to say every one of them would be magic on one take.
Oh yeah, with the 263 clarification
Yeah,
of the
it, it's
definition.
it's insane. I guess we'll do the 30,000 foot view first.
Yeah.
Guys that coming after your guns. If you have a pistol braced AR or AK style firearm, a pistol that you've been able to own and operate legally for over a decade with the grace and acknowledgement of the ATF. They when Joe Biden sat in the Rose Garden on April 8th of 2021 and said he wanted to have his ATF make those illegal and put those under the NFA. Well, here we are. That is exactly what's happening. Effective January 31st of 2023. Not sure when you're going to watch or listen to this. That was day one of this rule. We have 120 days, if we so choose, to comply with this tyranny, to utilize the open period to not pay for a tax stamp. So you have 120 days to file your e-form or your paper form 1 and register your SBR with the government.
Yeah.
And
Technically,
for those,
your SBR. So and like I said, we'll try not to get too in the weeds because sometimes I know people's eyes glaze over. But one of the interesting things that we saw through this clarification, the 263-page clarification, which I know you read and I've read multiple times now, and it's absolute garbage. But one of the things that the ATF has said is that these AR pistols, these AK pistols, are SBRs, and they have always been SBRs, despite their prior guidance letters multiple times to SB Tactical and a bunch of other companies. They played this weird game with talking about their clarification letters, where these clarification letters were clarifying, or these prior letters were clarifying some various aspects, but they weren't actually considering whether or not these items were SBRs.
right.
But now, finally, come 2023, when they're publishing this, now they're finally addressing the totality that these are, in fact, SBRs and have always been SBRs, despite what they said. And oh, yeah, through the final rule, they're also revoking all that prior guidance. So just forget what they've said.
Right.
Forget the guidance that they've said. They're saying that what they said, anyways, wasn't a complete approach or a complete review of the topic. Disregard all of that. These are, in fact, SBRs. They've always been SBRs, and you must register them so that they can fall under the NFA's restrictions.
Right. Even though one of the letters that they are trying to skirt away from was their response to a police sergeant who asked them specifically, if somebody takes these AR pistols and shoulders it, is it now an SBR?
Yeah.
And they said, nope, it doesn't change the fact that it's an AR pistol. And the ATF has said on numerous occasions, we do not and cannot regulate accessories. Yet here they are doing just that.
Yeah, which that's a whole rabbit hole we can. There are so many things wrong with this final rule. One of the things I actually, maybe we'll go back to that, but one of the things that rang in my head when you were giving your overview of what the ATF is doing is when President Biden came out and said that he was going to regulate pistol braces. And I don't know about you, but I remember at the time, I'm pretty sure I put out a video covering that. And I remember seeing a lot of comments being like, just, same political theater. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. The ATF has said that pistol braces or AR pistols or AK pistols with braces on them are not SBRs, that it doesn't matter if you shoulder it. They said you just try not to shoulder it essentially, but they're not going to do it. Biden's just trying to win political points.
Yeah.
Come to where we're at now, and we see that. I don't know. Did you see the same thing? Because I know I struggle a lot when I put up, sometimes, again, we have that calculus of the president said this or this politician said this. Do we want to cover that?
Right.
And when it came to the president with that one, I remember saying, yeah, I'll cover it because it is important, because what we saw with like the bump stock stuff, and then there was also rumblings about the frames and receiver stuff. I was like, this is something that they probably can and will try to do.
Yeah. And specifically the bump stock and the way it was done administratively and not through Congress, that opened a whole new door, which is the room we're living in right now.
Yeah.
And when that happened, I knew this is a whole new world we're going to have to fight. And take into fact, when it was still President-elect Biden, he met with then acting director of the ATF, Regina Lombardo, and he said, if you were me, what would you do to try to rein in gun violence?
What should we focus on? Yeah.
And she told him the easiest things for you is frames and receivers and the pistol braces. And what's the first thing he had his ATF do? Frame and receiver redefining, and now we're redefining rifle. And the ATF, DOJ doesn't have the legal, lawful, constitutional ability to do that, but here we are fighting it in court.
Yeah, and I know you did the same thing with the whole bump stock debacle, and we talked about those cases. I was screaming from the roof, like, it's not going to be isolated to bump stocks. I know there's a lot of people who said, nah, I don't care about bump stocks. Like, I don't use them. They're stupid anyways. It's like, yes, I understand that maybe the accessory is not, doesn't apply to you. But what we're doing is we're setting up a legal framework that the ATF or other agencies can then exploit down the road to then impact things you actually do care about. First, they started bump stocks, then they moved to frames and receivers, or those scary ghost guns.
Right.
And then now they're talking about, they're doing the pistol braces. And what's next?
That's what I was about to say. The next thing that's coming down the line that I'm willing to put a bet on, you've heard it a few times now, assault style pistol.
Yep.
So now we have assault pistols like handguns. Now that's the next thing, and there's been talk, first we'll restrict them down to 10 rounds, and then we'll go down to 5 rounds or 6 rounds. That's on the table in some states. They've already tried to implement that stuff. So they're not going to stop, folks. They're never going to stop. There's an agenda they're after, and they can't carry it out if the American populace is still armed. So when Anthony tells you it's time to take action, make a couple phone calls, maybe send an email, our lives are busy. I'll give you that. But it takes you about 5 minutes to do the things that he asked you to do. We might say, hey, call this number and say to this legislator, I don't support this because X, Y, and Z. Do that. It doesn't take long, but when we have 30, 40, 50,000, 100,000 people make phone calls, it absolutely does have an effect. I've talked to numerous legislators, numerous politicians, and they've all said that when our office gets hammered, we realize we have to do something. Not all politicians are going to be that. You can't call Dianne Feinstein and change her heart, but you know what?
Yeah.
Call her anyway, because silence is acceptance. If they don't hear anything from their people, they think they're doing the right thing.
If anything, just force them to send out those generic letters.
Dude,
make them work. Make them earn their money. Like, if they're going to try to violate our rights, make them work for it. Like,
right.
Make them do it. Like, it's interesting. Like, I struggle with that a lot, as far as like, a lot of people ask me, especially because when I do California specific videos, people are, why would I contact this representative? Why would I do X, Y, and Z? And there was a time period where maybe I understood that argument a little bit more. You still need to be active. But right now we have a lot of momentum. And even in California, if you would have asked me when I first started my channel and they were to introduce a gun control bill, like last year, they tried the CCW stuff. They've reintroduced it this year. Last year, we stopped it by 1 vote because it had the urgency clause.
Right.
But even before that, any other year, even with an urgency clause, I would have expected it to pass. I know I expected it to pass. I know a lot of people expected it to pass. It didn't even matter. They have a super majority. California has rubber stamped every piece of gun control legislation that's hit anyone's desk. So even that was a bright point. And when I was telling people, contact your representatives, call them, email them, let them know. A lot of them just don't They don't know or they don't care until you make them care, like you said, until you flood their inboxes and their mail and their phone and all that.
Yeah, the way that works is like they'll co-sponsor a bill because, hey, I did you a solid on your bill. I need a co-sponsor. That's how it works. Most time they don't read all of the bills because it's just a chess game for them. And that's why I say when you call them, give them the bill number and then tell them what it is because they probably don't know. So it's our job to educate them on this.
Yeah, and actually on that point, I wanted to mention for my audience that's listening, I would highly recommend, I think it's on your channel. Go to Jared's channel. He did a talk at the USCCA Expo. Did you do that live? Did it go to your channel?
I'd have to check, dude. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think I put it up though.
Somewhere. I'm pretty sure it was on your YouTube channel or something, or maybe USCCA's, but he did a talk at the USCCA Expo about contacting your representatives, and it was phenomenal. I was there in audience listening. It was great. If you have any questions about how do you do that, what's the best strategy, resources for that to find out who your representatives are, at the national level or state level, how to write a letter, how to write an email. He covered all that in that discussion. So I'll try to find it and link it in the detail section of this as well, because I think that was a great resource. And you actually in that had a ton of resources that they could utilize to do that.
Thanks, man.
So
yeah, it's easier. It's the important thing, for the folks listening is it's easier than you think. It can be very intimidating. I remember the first time I started calling politicians because of this channel, and I used to shake when I was on the phone and get all broken up. Your voice has inflections. It's easy. It's just like you're talking to your employer, and you don't have to really worry too much because you're not going to talk. It's very rare that you'll actually talk to a representative, especially in the federal level. You're going to talk to an aide whose job is to answer the phone and to take notes. And they're not the ones passing the bill, so or even proposing it. So don't scream and holler at them. They're just a kid trying to be a good intern. So it's really easy to do. They work for you. You are their employer. You're their supervisor. It's just like you're talking to a kid who did something wrong.
Yeah. So I'll try to find that and link it in the detail section. I know we went off on a little bit of a tangent with the ATF stuff, and I know we've covered it extensively on both of our channels. So I know if people want the resources or the breakdown of what the ATF rule does, they can find that on either one of ours. I guess the next phase of this, really, as far as the ATF, is the lawsuits. And you've covered it on your channel. As we're recording this, a video will go up soon on my channel covering it. But we've seen multiple lawsuits. I mean, the second that was published that day, I think we saw 3.
Yeah. We had one from the Firearms Policy Coalition that's been in effect for a year and a half that they stayed because they needed the rule to be pushed out.
Yeah, the SAF one. Yeah.
Yep. I'm sorry, yes, FSAF was the first one, and then FBC. There was three filed on day one of the rule of
it was FBC and then a couple individuals, right? There was 2 lawsuits from various individual groups, I think.
Yeah, and then yesterday, as we're recording this, we had Gun Owners of America in Texas filed along with some other parties, and then 25 states joined with FRAC, which is the Firearms Regulatory Accountability Council
Coalition.
I always screw it up.
Yeah. I always mess that one up. Yeah.
And that one, Alex Bosco is heavily involved in. SB Tactical. He's the inventor of the pistol brace. So he, his lawyers and his groups got 25 states to join up, as well as B&T and a Wounded Warrior. So there's some phenomenal lawsuits. If you geek out like Anthony and I, and you actually read all of the lawsuit, you actually see the weaknesses or the perceived weaknesses in the rule and which way they're going to attack it. And I don't see how we don't get this rule stopped, especially filing in Texas on some of them.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see the beats. Like sometimes you'll see similarities. Like, of course, a lot of the cases are challenging the APA. They're challenging, of course, Second Amendment grounds with Bruin, and you're seeing a lot of that as well. I think with the FRAC one, they also even brought in Caetano and like common use arguments, which was interesting. A lot of times they'll cover the same general topic, but they'll attack it in a little bit different nuance, like as far as the APA. I know with the, well, it wasn't specifically on the pistol brace, but a new interesting way I saw was when I think it was SAF and the Vanderstock Frames and Receivers lawsuit, they started to say that the ATF doubly erred with the frames and receivers because once the Supreme Court dropped the Bruin decision at the end of July, and it was June or June, July, and then the frames and receivers rule hit in August. Under the APA, well, first, under the Second Amendment grounds, you didn't take into account Bruen at all. You didn't really do a constitutional analysis at all based on the Second Amendment. But it also violated the APA to not do that test, because under the APA, they say that you're supposed to take into account all data and all indicators. And part of that data and evidence and indicators would as well be Supreme Court decisions that just happened a couple months before you issued the rule, which they didn't do. So it was an interesting blending of like a Second Amendment argument as well as APA procedural stuff blended into one argument. So it's always kind of interesting. And that's the stuff I nerd about. Like, it's always interesting to see these weird, nuanced arguments, because of course, every lawsuit, you want it to be a little bit different. You don't want to be just duplicating the same type of argument. It also gives you a better chance of getting this ultimately struck down. And you put it in different jurisdictions. Yes, there's strategic decision into bringing it into Texas because of the Cargill bump stock decision that just hit. But then you have FRAC in the 25 states filing in North Dakota, correct? I believe it was North Dakota.
Yes.
It was North Dakota. As well. You're probably going to get a friendly federal district court judge in North Dakota. So you're doing different jurisdictions, different venues, a little bit of different arguments, but ultimately with the same goal, which is right now, at least to try to get a TRO or a preliminary injunction before the 120 days. And I know that's pretty much what all those attorneys and everybody's gearing up to try to get.
One thing I did like about the two that were filed yesterday and reading those was that they're really exploiting the vagueness of the ATF and the rule. And I mean, as you know, the due process clause, if it's too vague, then it's unconstitutional because it's impossible to follow it. I took place in a live training seminar with the ATF that was for FFLs, and I am not an FFL, but I was in the room. And there was a Q&A session after that. And leading into the Q&A, they said, if you just take the pistol brace off and it's an AR pistol, you should be good to go, because the buffer tube is part of the operation of the firearm. And that will not be used as far as calculating, is it, rearward surface area suitable for shouldering. But if you read the rule, it doesn't say that in there. This is just an agent's opinion, because if it's not in there, then they can actually utilize that section because it is suitable for shoulder. Anything. I can shoulder this Gundy award. It's so vague that it's impossible to figure out what you're going to do or how to follow the law. So there's a lot of good ways that this rule has been attacked in the legal realm, and I can't wait for the first hearing to be held, because I'm going to be focused in on that pretty good.
Yeah, I off the top of my head, I also think I think I saw yesterday, one of the original ones that was filed in Texas by the individual plaintiffs. I think the judge already had set a hearing on something. I think it was like March 25th. Maybe it was a TRO hearing or preliminary injunction hearing. So I think that one is going to move fairly fast. That's not my favorite one. My favorite ones are actually the recent ones that got filed from FRAC and GOA. GOA is a little bit more comprehensive in their arguments, which I appreciate. I really like with the initial complaint when you're really flushing out all of your arguments. FRAC is a little bit more generalized, like you said, like, this violates due process. This violates, it's overly vague. This violates the APA because you muddied the procedure, because you had this worksheet 4999 that you put forward in the proposed rule. We all commented on, and then you just completely scrapped. Came up with a completely new process.
In violation.
Didn't get any comments on it. Didn't come with any comments. Didn't allow any comments on it at all. And now you're publishing it as a final rule, which you're not supposed to do under the APA. Which was a good argument, in my opinion, from FRAC. I think it's a strong argument, especially since we've seen the Fifth Circuit not like that type of stuff and is willing to. This FRAC isn't in the Fifth Circuit, but you've seen federal courts, en banc courts, multiple judges being willing to strike it down because it violates the APA, or the frames and receivers because it violates the APA. And again, frames and receivers followed the same procedure pretty much that this pistol brace World 1 did, and the bump stock. It all just kind of dominoed, and we really need to stop this because, like you said, we don't know what's next. Is it going to be magazines?
That's because they're following the marching orders. So Biden said, I can't get it done in Congress. So DOJ, you figure it out. And Garland, who still has a hair across his booty because he's not a Supreme Court justice, says to the ATF, get it done. And this is how they're trying to get it done. And I'm just glad we have groups that are on top of their game and willing to, put forth the time, effort, and money to file these lawsuits. And I always say in my videos, support those that support you. Pick and choose whatever group you want to support them, because they're all nonprofits. They operate off of donations and membership. So we all want them to sue. We all have to support them to do it as well.
Yeah. And I know I give organizations tons of promotion on my channel for free. I get nothing from it. You do the same. Usually if you hear us talking about an organization filing something, that means we like what they're doing. GOA, love what they do. You work closely with them. I've worked with them. I do little stuff here and there as far as just like talking to them. I don't actually do any legal work for them. So don't get that twisted, anybody who's watching this. But GOA is amazing. FRAC is amazing. I really like SAF. SAF has an amazing new group of people that I have worked with, like Adam Kraut, Lauren Hill. They are all over at SAF now, doing great stuff, filing great stuff there. I trust them. They do amazing things. FBC does great things. State orgs, like my state org, CRPA, it's a state affiliate of the NRA. Whatever feelings you have about the NRA, a lot of times their state orgs are really amazing, especially in restrictive states like California and New York, because the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association is the state affiliate of the NRA. That led to the Bruin decision. So there are amazing state orgs. There are amazing national orgs. Take it from an attorney who's worked for one of the national orgs. We need the money because we are fighting these federal government agencies, these state government agencies who have unlimited funds. They don't care. They're going to try to drag this stuff out as long as possible. And the last thing you want when we're fighting these legal cases is us worrying about hey, do we actually even have enough money to fight this monolith government who's going to try to drag this out? Because sometimes it's sad, but during discussions, that becomes part of the analysis. Are we going to litigate this specific one here, or do we want to save the funds and fight this battle over here because this one might get dragged out really, really bad over here in this state or this federal court case here? Maybe we should go over here. Maybe this is an easier path for a victory over here. It's similar stuff like we have to do with the videos, but it's not a calculus that you really want the organizations that are fighting for your rights to have to make.
Right. And I've been on those conversations with groups, and I won't tell you who they were, but I lived in Massachusetts, and I wanted to go hard on a subject that was happening here. And that conversation came up. Hey, we know that your attorney general is going to fight it all the way to the Supreme Court. And right now we could take that same argument in this state and it's not going to go that far. So that's probably where we're going to go. And, nobody wants to hear that, right? You're heartbroken, but it's a tactical decision sometimes.
Yeah. It's unfortunate that that's the way it has to be sometimes. But again, we are fighting someone oftentimes, who does have unlimited funds. They're going to use your taxpayer dollars to violate your rights.
But we can change that. Donate.
Yeah. Donate. So I think that's good. I think we'll leave it at that. I'm sure I'm going to have you on multiple other times, but yeah, appreciate everybody who's watching, listening. Jared, I really appreciate you coming on and having this impromptu discussion. For everybody listening, I literally just text him hey, do you want 30 minutes before we record? Hey, do you want to jump on the podcast? He's like, yeah, absolutely. So
my honor.
Thank you, Jared, for your time, man.
Thank you. Anytime, brother. It's my honor.
All right, guys. So I will leave. You should already be subscribed to Jared's channel, but if you're not, the channel's name is Guns and Gadgets. He does cover guns. There's not a whole lot of gadgets.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. Sometimes they're
demonetized.
Sometimes there are, but that's just an inside joke. We make fun. No guns or gadgets. But subscribe to his channel. I will also leave a link in the detail section of the audio form and then the YouTube channel as well over to him. Subscribe to his channel. Watch his stuff. I highly recommend it. It's one of the channels I've been watching before I even did YouTube. So can't recommend it enough. And he's a good friend of the channel and supports what we're doing here over on the podcast and over on the main channel. So, all right, everybody, appreciate it. Next podcast will probably be the following Monday. I don't know what we're going to cover, but I'll let you know. Thank you, guys.